The second Rick Murphy slid that flimsy piece of paper across the desk, I knew it was bad. I didn't expect that bad. A senior mechanic with 15 years in his shop, and he was cutting my pay by 20%. Like it was a casual adjustment, not a gut punch. "Tyler, you know I value you," Rick said, leaning back in his leather chair like some rear echelon officer who'd never seen real responsibility. "But times are tough, and everyone's got to do their part. I'm Tyler Brooks, 42 years old. 15 years ago, I traded army fatigues for coveralls, but some lessons stick with you. You learn fast in Afghanistan that a busted alternator doesn't just mean you're walking, it means you're sitting ducks. 3 tours of keeping convoys rolling taught me something Rick never figured out. There's no such thing as good enough when lives are on the line." I kept my hands still on the desk, refusing to fold the paper. That's what the Army teaches you, when to speak and when to listen. Right now, I was listening to a man who'd never understood the difference between leadership and just having rank. "Times are tough," I repeated. My voice was calm, but my brain was running tactical assessments. How many jobs I'd saved after Rick botched the initial diagnosis. How much business came from customers who'd only trust me with their cars. The fact that Rick Murphy had never so much as changed his own oil. Rick smiled, that fake smile he'd perfected over the years. "You're still getting more than most guys in the industry. I'm sure you understand." Understand? I understood plenty. I understood that while he was playing office manager, I'd been running field operations. Every comeback I prevented, every diagnostic I nailed on the first try, every customer who left knowing their family was safe on the road, that was military precision applied to civilian engines. "You're the backbone here, Tyler," he went on. "That's why I need you on board with this. We'll weather the storm together." "Right." I slid the paper back across the greasy desk's surface. "Storms don't usually come with you keeping the office bonus while the shop guys take the hit." His smile twitched, but he didn't rise to it. "Think about the big picture." I stood up. I have been. Walking back into the shop, the familiar symphony hit me. Impact wrenches chattering their rapid-fire staccato, the wheeze of the air compressor kicking on, classic rock bleeding from Tommy's radio in Bay 3. The smell of burnt transmission fluid mixed with fresh coffee from the pot I'd made at 0600. Same as always. 15 years of this routine, and Rick thought he could just flip a switch and cut my take-home. The crew knew something was up. You don't spend years working shoulder to shoulder without learning to read the signs. Marco glanced over from the brake job he was finishing, caught my expression, and went back to his work. These guys had families, mortgages, kids in school. They weren't going to risk crossing Rick over my problems. But here's what Rick never grasped. Respect isn't automatic just because your name's on the door. Mrs. Patterson's brake job last month was a perfect example. Rick had diagnosed worn pads, slapped on some bargain rotors without checking the calipers. She came back 2 days later with the same grinding noise and a scared look on her face. "Tyler, I specifically asked for you," she'd said. "But they told me, Mr. Murphy handled everything personally. I'd popped the wheel off and found the real problem. Caliper seized solid, brake fluid burnt black as motor oil. In Afghanistan, you learned that mechanical failures got people killed. Here, it just meant I stayed past closing time to fix what should have been done right the first time." 2 days later, Rick strutted into the break room bragging about his customer service excellence. The other guys just stared at their sandwiches. They all knew who'd actually turned the wrenches. It was always like that. My work, his signature. My relationships, his profit margins. The second I stepped out of his office, my phone buzzed against my chest pocket. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Too much on my mind, but something made me answer. "Tyler, this is Sandra Cole." I knew the name immediately. Owner of Cole Automotive across town, the place even other mechanics respected. Her operation was clean, professional, the kind of shop where quality mattered more than cutting corners. "I've heard you're not exactly happy where you are," she said. Her voice was direct, no nonsense. Businesslike, but with an edge that told me she'd done her homework. "I've been watching Murphy's operation for years. You're the only reason that place hasn't collapsed already." I leaned against my tool chest, watching Rick through the glass partition as he glad-handed a customer, grinning like he'd just performed a miracle. "A partnership? I don't need another employee, Tyler. I need a partner who knows what the hell he's doing. You'd have a say in everything, hiring, training, the work itself. Real input, not just following orders." I didn't answer right away. My heart was doing double time, but my voice stayed level. "That's a big offer." "It's a good one," she said. "You don't have to decide right now, but you should know. I'm talking to you first because your reputation speaks for itself. The customers, the suppliers, even my competition, they all say the same thing. Tyler Brooks does it right. We wrapped up the call and I slid the phone back into my pocket. I looked around at the bay. Grease-stained work orders pinned to the corkboard. The ancient Snap-on calendar showing Miss October 2019. The coffee can full of broken drill bits that Rick was too cheap to replace. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, running the numbers like any good mission briefing. Assets, liabilities, objectives, contingencies. The Army taught you that intelligence wins wars. Knowing what you bring to the fight, understanding your enemy's weaknesses, planning your operation down to the last detail. By the time I closed that notebook, I had 15 years of proof written down in black and white. Customer names, supplier contacts, the network of trust I'd built one honest job at a time. Rick might own the building, but I'd built everything that mattered inside it. And trust, like good soldiers, follows competent leadership. The next morning, I sat in my truck for a full 10 minutes before walking into Murphy's. Engine ticking as it cooled, country music bleeding from the radio, the same routine I'd followed for 15 years. Except today felt different. Today I was carrying orders that would change everything. I fired up my computer and sent Sandra a simple email. I'm in. The email to Sandra was barely sent when the familiar chaos of the shop pulled me back in. Tommy's impact wrench hammering away at lug nuts, the wheeze and thump of the hydraulic lift cycling up and down, that persistent drip from the overhead air line that Rick never bothered fixing. I'd worked in this controlled chaos for so long it felt like operating a forward operating base, organized mayhem that somehow got the mission done. But lately, it was a base with compromised leadership. Rick's management style was like watching a convoy commander who had never left the green zone try to run field operations. Every decision cost us time, money, or both. He'd source the cheapest Chinese knockoff parts, ignore manufacturer service bulletins, then act surprised when jobs came back with the same problems. I'd stopped counting how many comeback repairs I'd handled after hours, off the clock, just to keep customers from walking away permanently. The crew noticed, but nobody was going to speak up. Marco had 3 kids and a mortgage. Tommy was saving for his wedding. These guys weren't about to risk their paychecks over principles. Around mid-afternoon, I was elbow deep in a timing belt replacement when Tommy appeared at my shoulder. "Hey, boss wants to know if you can stay late tonight. Says he's got some VIP customer coming in with an emergency job." I wiped my hands on the red shop rag hanging from my belt. "Yeah, what kind of emergency?" "Didn't say, just said it was important." I looked toward the office where Rick was leaning back in his chair, feet up on the desk, scrolling through his phone. "Tell him to handle it himself. Sounds like it's right in his wheelhouse." Tommy's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and headed back. Through the glass, I watched him deliver the message. Rick's head snapped up, eyes finding mine across the shop floor. For a second, we just stared at each other. Then he went back to his phone, jaw working like he was chewing something tough. That wasn't irritation anymore. That was tactical clarity. I had skills Rick couldn't buy, relationships he couldn't fake, and a reputation built on 15 years of doing things the right way. I wasn't about to keep handing those assets over to someone who didn't even understand their value. That night, I sat in my truck with the engine idling and a spiral notebook open on the steering wheel. Intelligence gathering, contacts, key customers, suppliers who actually answered when I called. Every detail that kept this operation running. Military Planning 101. Know your assets, map your network, identify critical resources. By the time I turned off the ignition, 3 pages were filled with names, phone numbers, account details. This wasn't just about leaving anymore. This was about executing a clean extraction with 0 collateral damage. Monday morning came with that October chill that meant winter wasn't far off. I'd printed my resignation letter at home. 2 weeks notice, professional tone, nothing about the real reasons. Standard operating procedure when you're dealing with unpredictable leadership. Rick looked up from his monitor when I knocked on the door frame. "What's this?" "My notice," I said, setting the paper dead center on his desk. His eyebrows shot up, then he forced that salesman smile. "Come on, Tyler. You're overreacting. Look, if this is about the pay situation, we can work something out. Maybe we start talking about a promotion, shop supervisor, maybe even a small raise down the road when things improve." I kept my hands at my sides, feet shoulder-width apart. "Parade rest. It's not about the money, Rick." "Then what?" He leaned forward, trying to look concerned. "Help me understand here." "I'm moving on." His smile flickered. "You know, Tyler, the automotive industry's a small world around here. You don't want to burn bridges." Word gets around. I met his eyes. Good thing I'm leaving the bridge standing. That got under his skin. His face flushed, and for a second I thought he might actually say what he was really thinking. Instead, he straightened his tie and cleared his throat. Fine, but I expect you to finish your current projects professionally and not go around poaching my customers. I didn't bother responding. I just walked out and started clearing my personal gear. Toolbox drawers, the coffee mug my daughter had given me for Father's Day 3 years back, my collection of technical manuals that were actually worth reading. By lunch, Rick had shifted tactics. He started showing up in the bays more often, making comments just loud enough for everyone to hear. Hope you find a place that appreciates your independent approach to things. The kind of passive-aggressive warfare that reminded me why I'd gotten out of the Army in the first place. I ignored him. My customer relationships weren't built on his approval, and we both knew it. Sandra handed me a set of keys on my first morning at Cole Automotive. Shop's yours, Tyler. I'll handle the business side, vendor relationships, insurance, all that administrative stuff. You make this place run the way it should. Walking into that pristine bay felt like reporting to a competent CEO after months under incompetent leadership. Clean workstations, current generation diagnostic equipment, parts inventory that made sense. Within the first week, we'd reorganized the workflow, implemented a proper scheduling system, and ditched every piece of cheap aftermarket junk Rick would have called perfectly adequate. Man, it's like we can actually think in here, said Marco. I'd convinced him to make the jump after Sandra approved my recommendation for a substantial pay increase. That's the objective, I told him. Work smarter, keep the customers happy, everything else follows. And it did. Jobs flowed smoother. Comeback repairs dropped to nearly zero. Customers left knowing exactly who'd worked on their vehicles and why the work was done right. 2 weeks into the new operation, I heard that familiar diesel rumble in the parking lot. Larry Stone climbed down from his delivery truck cab with his usual grin. "Never thought I'd see you under different colors, Tyler," he said, shaking my hand. "Better command structure," I replied. "Same mission, better leadership." Larry didn't waste time with small talk. "I've got 3 trucks in my fleet that need full service. You still interested in real work?" "Always." "Military precision, civilian prices," he said, pulling out his phone to check his schedule. "That's why I keep coming back. Plus, you actually answer your phone when something breaks down." "Once a soldier, always a soldier," I said. "Just serving in a different uniform now." Word travels fast in our business. Within 3 weeks, I'd seen half a dozen familiar faces walk through Cole's front door. They'd shake their heads, grumble about the chaos they'd left behind at Murphy's, then get that relieved look when they realized they didn't have to explain their problems 3 times to 3 different people. Our parts suppliers started prioritizing our orders because they knew we paid invoices on time and didn't call them up screaming about warranty claims for substandard parts we never should have installed in the first place. But every satisfied customer, every smooth transaction, made me wonder how long Rick could keep his operation afloat without the foundation I'd spent 15 years building. I didn't have to wonder long. 3 weeks after I'd left, Larry called me on a Thursday evening. I was just finishing up paperwork when his name popped up on my phone. "Tyler, you got a minute? I need to tell you something." "What's up?" I drove by Murphy's today to pick up some parts I'd left there. 2 bays sitting empty, tools scattered around like a yard sale, and Rick's out in the parking lot having a shouting match with some customer. The place looks like a forward operating base that's lost radio contact with command. I leaned back in my chair. Through the window, I could see Sandra reviewing the next day's schedule. Everything organized and under control. How bad? Bad. Tommy told me they've lost 3 major accounts this month. That big fleet contract with Morrison Logistics? Gone. Rick tried to charge them for comeback work. You know, the stuff that should have been done right the first time. That stung a little. Morrison had been one of my first big accounts, built over years of showing up when their drivers needed help, fixing things right without excuses or finger pointing. "What about the crew?" "Down to Tommy and 1 other guy. Marco followed you, obviously. The others just drifted away when the hours got cut." When I hung up, I sat there for a minute, staring at the organized chaos of our shop. Part of me felt bad for Rick. Watching something you'd put your name on fall apart can't be easy. But another part, the part that remembered 15 years of watching him take credit for work he couldn't do himself, felt like maybe this was just the natural order of things finally asserting itself. Sandra noticed the shift in our business before I did. "You weren't kidding about your customer base," she said one afternoon, reviewing our appointment book. "We're booked solid for 3 weeks. I've never seen anything like it." "Trust takes years to build," I told her. "But once you have it, it follows you." It wasn't just individual customers. Word was getting around the business community too. That fleet manager Larry had mentioned? He called me directly the next week. "Tyler, I need to ask you something straight," he said. His voice had that edge you hear when someone's been dealing with problems for too long. "If I pull my contract from Murphy's, can you handle 23 vehicles on a maintenance schedule?" I looked around our shop. We were busy, but not swamped. Good systems make scalability possible. That's a big move. "You sure you want to make that call?" "Let me put it this way. Last month, I paid them to fix a transmission problem on 3 different trucks. All 3 trucks came back with the same issue. I can't keep bleeding money while Rick figures out what you used to handle automatically." "Send them over," I said. "They'll be done right the first time." That's all I needed to hear. That conversation repeated itself 6 more times over the next month. Fleet managers, small business owners, even individual customers who'd gotten tired of comeback repairs and excuse-making. We signed 4 new commercial contracts and had to start discussing expansion with Sandra. "If this keeps up, we'll need 2 more bays," she said, reviewing our revenue projections. Meanwhile, the intelligence network was painting a clear picture of Murphy's decline. Tommy stopped by one Saturday morning, looking like he'd aged 5 years and 2 months. "Man, this place is like a different planet," he said, watching our crew work with actual coordination and purpose. "Over there, it's like watching a disaster in slow motion. Parts orders are wrong half the time. Rick's trying to do diagnostic work himself and making everything worse. And he's blaming everyone but himself for why customers are leaving. You thinking about making a change?" I asked. He nodded. "A couple of us are talking about it. But you know how it is. Steady paycheck versus unknown situation." "I get it," I told him. "But there's steady paychecks and then there's working for someone who knows what they're doing." The breaking point came when Rick started raising prices. Word got around that he'd implemented what he called quality assurance fees, basically charging customers extra for the privilege of getting their cars fixed properly. The market responded predictably. One afternoon, my phone rang. Pete Morrison from the delivery company. "You're not going to believe this," he said, and I could hear the mixture of anger and disbelief in his voice. "Rick just called me up, accused you of poaching his accounts. Said if I didn't bring my business back, he'd take legal action for interference." I had to laugh. "What did you tell him?" "Told him it's my choice where my trucks get serviced, and maybe he should focus on figuring out why his customers are leaving instead of threatening the ones who already left." But Tyler, I gotta say, he sounded desperate. Like really desperate. Desperate was right. The word around the supplier network was that Rick had maxed out his credit lines, couldn't make payroll without cutting hours, and was trying to run a 3-bay shop with 2 part-time techs who wouldn't know a transmission from a differential. "You could probably buy him out for pennies on the dollar right now," Tommy mentioned during one of his Saturday visits. "Not interested," I told him. "I don't want that mess anywhere near what we've built here." But I'd be lying if I said I didn't keep track of how the other operation was fading. Not out of spite, but because patterns tell you things. Without competent leadership, good systems, and skilled personnel, even a profitable business can collapse faster than you'd think possible. Still, I kept tabs on Murphy's situation. Not out of spite, but because understanding your former operational area is basic intelligence gathering. And what I was seeing was a textbook case of leadership failure under pressure. By month 3, Rick had burned through his remaining staff. Tommy finally made the jump to our team after Rick tried to dock his pay for a comeback repair that wasn't even his fault. The last certified tech walked out when Rick refused to pay for a training certification that would have kept them current with new diagnostic systems. Place is down to Rick and one part-timer who barely knows which end of a wrench to hold, Tommy told me on his first day with us. And Rick's trying to handle complex electrical diagnostics himself. It's like watching someone try to defuse a bomb with a hammer. The final straw came when another vendor called asking if we could take over a commercial contract Rick had been botching for months. "Everything that comes out of there lately turns into a 3-callback nightmare," the guy said. "Last week, they fixed a fleet vehicle's transmission issue by replacing the transmission. Turned out to be a $50 solenoid. Customers threatening to sue, and honestly, I don't blame them. Send it over," I told him. When I hung up, Sandra was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, reviewing our rapidly expanding client roster. "You realize there's no coming back from this for him, right?" I nodded, feeling that strange mix of professional satisfaction and human sympathy you get when you watch a fellow veteran struggle with civilian leadership challenges. "He's doing all the damage himself. We're just here to pick up the pieces." The Automotive Trade Expo happens every fall in our region. 2 days of vendors, new equipment demonstrations, and networking that keeps the industry connected. I was halfway through a conversation with a diagnostic equipment rep when I heard my name called out across the exhibition floor. "Tyler Brooks." I turned around and there was Rick Murphy pushing through the crowd like he was advancing on an enemy position. His shirt was wrinkled, tie askew, eyes darting around at the people who were starting to notice the commotion. This wasn't going to be a professional conversation. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he started, voice loud enough to draw attention from 3 booths over. "Walk out on me, gut my business, then show up here like you're the industry success story?" I stayed where I was, hands at my sides, feet planted. Military bearing, calm, professional, in control of the situation. The equipment rep took a step back, but stayed close enough to hear how this played out. "Rick, you're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" His face was flushed red, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "You're a saboteur. You took my clients, my vendors, my staff. You systematically destroyed everything I built." The circle of listeners was growing. I could see faces I recognized, suppliers, shop owners, industry people who'd been watching this situation develop for months. Everyone knew the story by now. "You didn't lose your business because of me, Rick. You lost it because you never learned how to run it." That hit like a direct shot. His mouth worked for a second before he found his voice again. "I built that shop from nothing. You bought a building and hung a sign," I said, keeping my tone level and factual. "Everything else, the customer relationships, the supplier trust, the reputation for quality work, that was built by people who actually knew what they were doing. You just signed the checks. You had 15 years of opportunity," I continued. 15 years to learn the technical side, to understand what makes customers loyal, to figure out the difference between leading and just giving orders. Instead, you spent 15 years taking credit for other people's work and wondering why you couldn't do it yourself. The crowd had grown quiet. Someone's radio was playing country music from a distant booth, but everyone in our immediate area was focused on this conversation. Rick jabbed a finger at me. "You're going to regret this. I'll make sure everyone in this industry knows what kind of person you really are." "Good luck with that," I said. Then I looked around at the faces surrounding us. People who'd been watching my work for years, suppliers who'd seen the difference between professional competence and amateur hour, shop owners who understood what it took to actually run a successful operation. I think most folks here have already formed their own opinions. An older shop owner I'd known for years stepped forward, giving Rick the kind of look you reserve for customers who try to argue about legitimate charges. "Maybe it's time you stopped blaming everyone else for your problems and started taking some responsibility," he said quietly. That landed harder than anything I'd said. Rick's mouth opened, then closed. He looked around at the faces, searching for sympathy or support and finding neither. His shoulders sagged slightly, and he straightened his tie like that would somehow fix the situation. "I've got customers to take care of," I said, ending the confrontation. I turned back towards the equipment rep, who was trying to pretend he hadn't just witnessed a public meltdown. Behind me, the crowd slowly dispersed. Rick stood there for another minute, small and alone in the middle of the aisle before walking away without another word. 6 months later, our operation had doubled in size. We'd added 2 more bays, hired 3 additional techs, and Sandra was fielding calls about opening a second location. I still worked the floor most days, but spent equal time on strategic planning and business development, the kind of leadership role I'd never had access to under Rick's management. One Thursday morning, I was reviewing our quarterly numbers when my phone rang. Unknown number, but the area code looked familiar. "Tyler Brooks?" a professional voice asked. "That's me. This is Greg Harrison, Regional Director for North Point Auto Supply. I've been following your operation since you left Murphy's. We're launching a pilot program for independent shops, exclusive distribution agreements, co-op marketing, equipment financing. Your name came up as our first choice for this region." I leaned back in my chair. 6 months ago, I was getting my pay cut by a boss who couldn't change his own oil. Now I was fielding calls from regional directors of national supply chains. What exactly are we talking about? Full partnership. Not just parts supply. We want to feature your shop as a model operation in our network. Regional training center, equipment showcase, the works. This is expansion level opportunity, Tyler. After I hung up, Sandra appeared in the doorway with coffee and that knowing smile. Another growth opportunity? I looked out at our bays. Crew working in perfect coordination, customers getting honest value, the steady hum of a well-run operation accomplishing its mission. "Yeah," I said. "I think we're ready for the next objective."